What if the people you trusted most, your family, your own blood, were hiding a darkness so deep, so unfathomable, that it could destroy the life you thought you knew? What if the very people you counted on for love and protection became the reason you would never feel safe again? This is not a hypothetical question. This is what happened in the quiet, tree-lined streets of Brentwood, Los Angeles, in a home where Hollywood royalty lived comfortably behind closed doors. The home of Rob Reiner, the legendary director, actor, and producer, and his wife Michelle, a woman known for her grace, elegance, and quiet presence in Hollywood circles. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Sunday began like any other day for the Reiner family, or so it seemed. The sun rose over their sprawling $13.5 million estate. The birds chirped in the meticulously landscaped gardens, and the world outside had no idea that by nightfall, the Reiners' lives, and the legacy of one of Hollywood's most iconic families, would be irrevocably shattered. Rob Reiner, 78, had spent decades shaping the entertainment world, directing classics, and earning accolades that few could rival. Michelle, 70, was his partner not only in life, but in supporting his journey, quietly influential in her own right, and the mother of 3 children, including Nick, 32, who lived in the guest house on their property. But the tranquility of that Sunday was violently disrupted. By the evening, Rob and Michelle were found stabbed to death inside their own home. The discovery was made by their daughter Romy, 27, who had gone to check on her parents. Imagine the horror, the immediate, gut-wrenching disbelief she must have felt, the fear that no one could ever be fully prepared for. And as the investigation unfolded, a chilling reality emerged. Someone the Reiners knew intimately, someone who had lived in their home, could be responsible. Nick Reiner, the son who had grown up under the protective wing of his parents, was arrested that very night. 2 counts of first-degree murder. The news sent shockwaves through Hollywood, through Los Angeles, and across the world. How could this happen? How could a family so outwardly normal, so admired, descend into such an unimaginable tragedy? And more importantly, what led to this night of horror? These are the questions that would drive an investigation, haunt the surviving family members, and grip the public in a mix of fascination and revulsion. But before we dive into the arrest, the autopsy, and the shocking details that have come to light, we need to understand the family behind the tragedy. Rob Reiner's life has been lived in the public eye, but even the most carefully curated public persona can hide fractures and fissures that no one sees until it's too late. Rob's career has been storied, from his acting breakthrough in All in the Family to directing cinematic masterpieces like When Harry Met Sally and A Few Good Men. Behind these accolades, though, was a family life that, like all families, had its complexities, tensions, and secrets. Michelle Reiner was known for her warmth, her ability to quietly navigate Hollywood society, and her commitment to her family. Yet, even in families that appear idyllic from the outside, there can be simmering conflicts, unspoken resentments, and tensions that, under certain circumstances, explode into tragedy. The Reiners' children, Romy, Nick, and their siblings, grew up in privilege, yes, but also under scrutiny. Public attention, parental expectations, and the pressures of Hollywood life are not a recipe for simple, conflict-free family dynamics. And in this case, those pressures may have intersected with deeper, darker issues, culminating in a night that no one could have predicted. When Romy discovered her parents, the details were horrifying. The scene inside the Brentwood estate was grim, each room telling its own story of what had occurred. Police reports would later describe the scene as a shocking tableau, one that immediately drew investigators' focus towards someone who had both motive and opportunity, and that someone was closer to the Reiners than anyone could have imagined. But what Romy told the police was even more chilling. She had warned them about a family member she described as dangerous, someone who had always unsettled her, someone she feared could cause real harm. Could she have known something was coming? Could she have sensed the storm that would strike the family home? As investigators began their work, the public was left grappling with more questions than answers. How did someone who lived under the same roof as his parents become a suspect in their brutal deaths? What were the warning signs, and why had no one acted sooner? And what do the autopsy results reveal that is so disturbing it has stunned even seasoned crime analysts? These are not questions that have easy answers, and as the investigation continues to unfold, each revelation seems to pull back the curtain further on a family life that was far from ordinary. Hollywood has long been fascinated by stories of fame, fortune, and the dark side of success, but rarely do these stories hit so close to home, literally. Here is a family that seemed, on the surface, to embody success, stability, and love. Yet behind the scenes, there were tensions, suspicions, and a series of events that would escalate into unimaginable violence. The arrest of Nick Reiner marks not only the beginning of a legal battle, but the unraveling of a family legacy that seemed untouchable. It is a stark reminder that wealth, fame, and public admiration cannot shield anyone from the tragedies that can lurk behind closed doors. But what made this tragedy even more compelling, and even more terrifying, were the details revealed by the autopsy. Reports suggest that the findings went beyond confirming the obvious cause of death. They exposed a level of brutality and a set of circumstances that raised questions about motive, premeditation, and the psychological state of the suspect. What did the autopsy reveal about Michelle Reiner's final moments? What does it tell us about Rob Reiner's last moments of life? These findings are central to understanding the full scope of what occurred that night and what they mean for the ongoing investigation. And then there is the matter of public perception. Hollywood insiders, fans, and the media were all watching as the story unfolded, desperate for details, for clues, for answers. In a world dominated by social media, speculation ran rampant. Conspiracy theories, theories about family disputes, and even theories about outside involvement flooded timelines and comment sections. But beneath the sensational headlines and the viral speculation lies a deeply human story, a story about family, betrayal, and the consequences of unresolved tensions escalating into tragedy. From the moment of the arrest, the story has only grown more complex. Nick Reiner's past, his relationship with his parents, and the warnings from Romy all intersect in ways that investigators are still trying to piece together. There are reports of prior disagreements, of subtle tensions that may have gone unnoticed by casual observers, but were very real to those living within the family home. And as the investigation continues, more pieces of the puzzle emerge, each one raising new questions and revealing that the seemingly perfect life of the Reiners was not quite what it appeared to be. This is not a story that will be resolved quickly, nor is it a story with easy answers. Each layer peels back to reveal another, more disturbing layer beneath. Each revelation forces us to reconsider our assumptions about family, trust, and safety. And as the autopsy results, police reports, and family testimonies come to light, we begin to see a picture that is as shocking as it is tragic. So, as we begin to explore this story in full, ask yourself, how well do we truly know the people closest to us? How could a family that seemed so ordinary, so loving, be destroyed in a single night? And what secrets were hidden behind the walls of a $13.5 million Brentwood estate? Secrets that would only emerge after a crime so violent it has stunned the world? They say you never truly know someone until it's too late. For Rob Reiner, the world knew him as a towering figure in Hollywood, a man who could make audiences laugh, cry, and reflect, often all in a single film. From his iconic role as Michael Stivic on All in the Family to directing timeless movies like When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, and A Few Good Men, his career was a tapestry of brilliance, humor, and cultural impact. Fans saw the accolades, the award shows, the interviews, but behind the spotlight was a man who carried the weight of family expectations, personal ambitions, and, as the events of that fateful Sunday revealed, a home life that was far more complicated than anyone could imagine. Rob Reiner's legacy, like that of so many in Hollywood, was twofold. There was the public persona, the smiling, articulate, accomplished celebrity whose films shaped generations. And then there was the private life, where he was husband, father, and household leader. His wife, Michelle, was an integral part of that private world. While she rarely appeared in the limelight, those close to the family described her as warm, intelligent, and quietly influential. She had a way of balancing Rob's high-energy persona with calm reason, a stabilizing force in a family that was, from the outside, picture perfect. Their children, Romy, Nick, and their other siblings, grew up in a household that combined Hollywood glamour with the typical challenges of family life. Public perception often paints celebrity families as untouchable, untarnished by the conflicts and struggles that ordinary households endure. But the Reiners were not immune. Behind closed doors, there were tensions, disagreements, and dynamics that, while subtle, would become crucial in understanding the tragedy that unfolded. Romy Reiner, the eldest daughter, had long admired her parents. At 27, she had carved out a life of her own, but she remained deeply connected to her family. In the days leading up to the tragedy, she had been in touch with her parents, checking in as any devoted child would. Yet, like many in families with complex dynamics, Romy sensed undercurrents that outsiders could not see. She reportedly had expressed concerns about certain behaviors in the family, referring to one member as dangerous and implying that there were hidden tensions that could escalate if left unchecked. At the time, these remarks might have seemed like ordinary sibling squabbles or minor family disagreements, but hindsight reveals them in a far more chilling context. Nick Reiner, 32, lived in the guest house on the Brentwood estate, a structure that provided independence but kept him close enough to remain entwined in family matters. Nick had his own history, interests, and personality quirks, things that, in a normal family setting, might be manageable or even endearing. But the environment of a high-profile household, combined with the pressures of living under a famous father and a protective mother, may have contributed to frictions that escalated over time. Reports later indicated that Nick had previously clashed with his parents, though the details remained private and largely speculative. Still, the stage was being set for a convergence of circumstances that would culminate in one of the most shocking crimes Hollywood had ever seen. The Reiner estate itself was more than just a home. It was a symbol of the family's success and stature. Sprawling gardens, luxurious interiors, and a guest house that offered both privacy and proximity. All were part of a lifestyle afforded by decades of cinematic achievement. But with this level of affluence comes isolation. The estate, while secure and beautiful, could also be a stage for hidden conflicts. It was a place where secrets could fester, where tensions could escalate unnoticed, and where the line between public image and private reality blurred dangerously. Understanding the family dynamics requires examining the balance of personalities. Rob, as the patriarch, was assertive, ambitious, and often larger than life. Michelle was nurturing, composed, and skilled at managing family relations. Their children each had distinct identities, shaped by both the privileges and pressures of growing up in a high-profile environment. Romy was cautious yet perceptive. Nick appeared independent, but reportedly struggled with personal issues, and the youngest siblings, though less publicly discussed, were part of the same intricate web of familial relationships. Within this framework, even minor disagreements could take on heightened significance. The Reiner family's story is also a cautionary tale about perception versus reality. From the outside, they represented the ideal Hollywood family: success, culture, refinement, and public affection. But the events of that Sunday forced a reckoning. Appearances can be deceiving, and even the most seemingly perfect families can harbor turbulence that no one notices until tragedy strikes. This duality, public success versus private turmoil, is central to understanding not only what happened, but why it resonates so strongly with audiences around the world. Hollywood has a fascination with the personal lives of its stars. The public craves stories of glamour, romance, and scandal, but when the story involves violence, betrayal, and familial strife, interest spikes to a different level entirely. In this case, the combination of celebrity status, a brutal double homicide, and the involvement of a family member as the prime suspect created a narrative that was irresistible to both mainstream media and social media audiences. Each revelation, each piece of evidence, each hint of motive added layers to the story, deepening both the intrigue and the horror. Yet while the public narrative focused on the shocking nature of the crime, the human story at the center is one of loss, grief, and unanswered questions. Romy, forced into the role of witness and survivor, had to process not only the loss of her parents, but also the betrayal by her own brother. Neighbors, friends, and colleagues of the Reiners were left struggling to reconcile the family they thought they knew with the events that unfolded. And as investigators began piecing together the night's events, it became clear that the story was far from simple. This chapter of the Reiner legacy also underscores the complexity of familial relationships. Love, loyalty, resentment, ambition, and fear. All these elements intersected in ways that would ultimately have deadly consequences. The Reiner story is a reminder that no matter how much wealth, fame, or influence one possesses, family dynamics remain unpredictable, fragile, and sometimes devastatingly dangerous. As we move forward in this investigation, we must consider the implications of a home that was both sanctuary and stage, of a family bound by blood but tested by circumstances. The interplay between public perception and private reality is stark, and each revelation only deepens the mystery. From Rob's illustrious career to Michelle's quiet but influential presence, from Romy's warnings to Nick's actions, every layer of this family's history provides crucial context for understanding the tragedy that occurred in their Brentwood estate. And just as the Reiner legacy was being publicly celebrated, privately, forces were converging that no one could have predicted. The combination of long-simmering tensions, individual behaviors, and the pressures of living in a high-profile environment created a perfect storm. When the violence erupted, it was not merely a random act. It was the culmination of factors that had been silently building for years. So as we begin to unravel the events of that night, it is essential to understand who the Reiners were, what shaped their family life, and how the very bonds that should have provided safety and support became entangled in a web of tragedy. The story of Rob Reiner's family is both a cautionary tale and a harrowing glimpse into the dangers that can lurk behind the facades of wealth, fame, and normalcy. Imagine a house that is both sanctuary and stage. A sprawling $13.5 million estate tucked away in the affluent neighborhood of Brentwood, Los Angeles, where palm trees sway and the city's noise feels like a distant hum. To the outside world, the Reiner home represented success, refinement, and the quiet luxury of Hollywood royalty. But for those who lived there, it was more than just a symbol of wealth. It was a complex ecosystem, a place where private lives, ambitions, and tensions coexisted behind walls designed to keep the world out. The estate itself was nothing short of impressive. Meticulously landscaped gardens surrounded the main residence, offering both beauty and privacy. Hidden pathways, manicured lawns, and ornate fountains gave the impression of serenity. Guests arriving at the property would notice the sense of order and care. Every hedge trimmed, every flower carefully positioned, every detail reflecting a family that took pride in appearances. The main house, grand yet inviting, contained multiple wings, expansive living spaces, and areas designed for both family gatherings and quiet, private moments. And then there was the guest house. A separate structure on the property, it offered independence while keeping occupants close to the family hub. Nick Reiner, the son who would later become the prime suspect in one of the most shocking crimes in Hollywood history, lived there. The guest house provided him with a sense of autonomy, yet its proximity ensured that the family remained intertwined, that daily interactions could not be avoided, and that tensions, if any, would simmer under the same roof, even if technically in separate buildings. Security measures were in place, as one might expect in a home of this caliber. Cameras, alarms, and gates provided the family with a sense of safety from outsiders. Yet, paradoxically, it also created a false sense of security. The very features designed to keep danger at bay could not protect them from the threat that would emerge from within. Someone who had unrestricted access, someone whose familiarity with the property became a terrifying advantage. Inside the main house, the layout suggested both openness and privacy. Large living rooms with expansive windows allowed natural light to flood in, but hidden corners, staircases, and private rooms created spaces where secrets could be kept. Bedrooms were sanctuaries, offices were private retreats, and hallways connected these areas with an almost labyrinthine intimacy. To the casual visitor, it was a haven. But on the night of the tragedy, each space became a witness, silently holding the details of a violent act that would shock everyone who had ever walked those halls. The estate also bore the marks of the family's personality. Rob's love of cinema and storytelling manifested in decor, photographs, and personal artifacts throughout the home. Awards and framed movie posters lined walls. Photographs captured moments of laughter and family milestones. Michelle's influence could be seen in the home's elegance, warmth, and attention to detail, reflecting her ability to manage a household of prominence with style and grace. Every room, every object told a story. But some stories, as we would soon discover, were far darker than anyone could have anticipated. Neighbors in Brentwood were no strangers to celebrity residents, but the Reiner family had long maintained a balance of visibility and discretion. They were admired, respected, yet private, a combination that fostered both curiosity and respect. For years, there were reports of garden parties, charity events, and social gatherings, yet the family also maintained a distance, keeping their personal lives shielded from prying eyes. That distance, however, would do little to prevent tragedy from reaching the heart of their home. On the day of the incident, the estate became the center of an unfolding nightmare. The peaceful grounds, the carefully curated exterior, the security measures, all failed to shield the family from the violent act that would soon occur. It's an ironic, chilling reminder that no matter how much one invests in material protection, the real threats are sometimes those closest to us. Investigators would later spend hours examining the estate, noting not only the scene of the crime but the access points, the layout, and the proximity of family members to one another. Every detail mattered: how someone moved through the house, how they could enter or leave the property unnoticed, and how their familiarity with the home could facilitate the crime. All became pieces of the puzzle that detectives would work to assemble. The architecture that once symbolized security now underscored vulnerability. The guest house, in particular, became a focal point of inquiry. Nick's presence there on the night of the incident was no coincidence. Living on the same property, he had intimate knowledge of the house's layout, security systems, and routines. For someone planning or acting impulsively in a violent crime, this familiarity is a dangerous tool. Investigators noted how proximity allowed for both opportunity and access, raising questions about premeditation, timing, and motive. Yet the estate was more than just a backdrop for crime. It reflected the family's history, their successes, and their daily life. Every photograph, every memento, every carefully positioned piece of furniture contributed to the narrative of a family who had built a life together, who had celebrated milestones, and who had shared ordinary moments that now seemed tragically ironic in light of what occurred. A kitchen where laughter might have echoed during breakfast became a silent witness. Living rooms that hosted family movie nights or holiday gatherings were now the setting for one of the most horrifying crimes imaginable. In addition to the physical layout, the estate's location in Brentwood added another layer of context. Nestled among affluent homes, it offered prestige and seclusion, but also scrutiny. Neighbors had eyes on the property, even if discreetly. Rumors, whispers, and subtle observations had circulated over the years, though none could have anticipated the events that would transpire. The combination of isolation and visibility created a perfect storm, where secrets could fester, tensions could escalate, and the tragedy that unfolded would eventually be examined in painstaking detail by police, the media, and the public alike. What makes this story particularly gripping is the contrast between perception and reality. To an outsider, the estate was a symbol of success, a Hollywood haven, a place of elegance and serenity. But within its walls, the Reiner family's private dynamics played out in ways that were far less harmonious. The estate, for all its beauty and security, was a stage where underlying tensions could erupt into violence. And as we follow the investigation, it becomes clear that the layout, the proximity of family members, and the very design of the property all played crucial roles in the tragic events of that night. The night of the incident turned the Brentwood estate from a symbol of security and comfort into a crime scene studied by experts, reporters, and a fascinated public. Every room, hallway, and doorway became a focal point for questions. How did the events unfold? Where were the family members? How did the suspect move through the property unnoticed? These questions would guide the investigation, uncovering both the practical realities of the crime and the deeper, unsettling truths about the family dynamic. And while the media often focuses on the shocking nature of the crime itself, it is the estate, the space where normalcy and terror collided, that tells a story just as compelling. A $13.5 million home, designed for security, privacy, and family comfort, became the stage for a violent betrayal that nobody could have foreseen. And in that collision of wealth, design, and familial proximity, we see a lesson that resonates far beyond Hollywood. No matter how carefully life is curated, chaos can enter even the most secure spaces. Sunday evening in Brentwood began like any other, with the warm glow of sunset brushing against the manicured lawns of the Reiner estate. From the outside, the world saw only tranquility, the quiet streets, the luxury homes, and the kind of calm that comes from living in one of Los Angeles's most exclusive neighborhoods. But inside the Reiner estate, that calm was about to shatter in ways no one could have imagined. Rob and Michelle Reiner had spent the day attending to the small, ordinary routines that filled their lives. Phone calls, preparing dinner, checking in with family. To any casual observer, the day seemed uneventful, peaceful, and typical of a Sunday evening. Yet beneath this surface, the undercurrents of tension, small arguments, and unspoken conflicts, elements common in many households, were quietly at play. By early evening, the family's routines began to diverge. Nick, who lived in the guest house on the property, was moving between his private space and the main house, though exactly why remains a matter of speculation. Romy, the daughter, had been in contact with her parents throughout the day, visiting briefly or checking in via phone. She noticed small anomalies, minor lapses in conversation, strange silences, or subtle shifts in tone, that, in hindsight, hinted that something was wrong. At the time, these were dismissed as ordinary family quirks, not precursors to a horrific event. As night fell, the estate's luxury and security became both a comfort and a complication. Security cameras, gates, and alarms were in place, yet none of these could prevent what was about to occur. The very design of the property, intended to protect and isolate the family from external threats, ironically amplified the danger posed by someone who knew the estate intimately. Familiarity with the layout, routines, and security systems would make it almost impossible for outsiders, or even investigators initially, to fully grasp how the tragedy unfolded. At some point in the evening, the violence erupted. According to reports, both Rob and Michelle were stabbed inside the main residence. The details are chilling. Each act carried a level of brutality that suggested both proximity and intent. It was not a random attack. It was personal, calculated, and executed by someone with intimate knowledge of the family's routines and vulnerabilities. The estate, which had long been a haven, became a crime scene, its rooms transformed from spaces of comfort and memory into places that held horrifying evidence. Romy's discovery of her parents' bodies was the first confirmation of the tragedy for the world outside. Imagine the shock, the disbelief, the suddenness of it. Walking through familiar halls, expecting to find comfort, and instead encountering the unimaginable. Her emotions must have been a mixture of fear, grief, and urgency. Her immediate reaction, calling authorities, providing details, and recounting her fears about a dangerous family member, set in motion a chain of events that would quickly consume the estate, the Reiner family, and the public's attention. Police responded quickly to the 911 call, arriving at the property with the weight of both urgency and disbelief. As they approached the sprawling estate, officers were confronted with a scene that combined elements of domestic tragedy with the calculated nature of an insider crime. The main house, designed to shelter, now concealed the horror within. Every hallway, every doorway, every room became a point of scrutiny, a place where investigators needed to reconstruct the timeline and understand how the events had unfolded. Initial statements from authorities were sparse but telling. They confirmed that the victims were Rob and Michelle Reiner, that the cause of death was stabbing, and that there was a potential suspect close to the family. The press, ever eager for details, began reporting immediately, amplifying the sense of urgency and public fascination. Headlines flashed around the world. Hollywood shocked. Rob Reiner and wife found dead. family tragedy in Brentwood estate. Son arrested following double homicide. Social media erupted with speculation, theories, and tributes, creating an information storm even as investigators were just beginning to piece together the night's events. Behind the scenes, the investigation was meticulous. Officers combed through the estate, noting access points, possible escape routes, and the positions of the victims' bodies. They gathered evidence, took photographs, and began the painstaking task of reconstructing a night that had gone from ordinary to catastrophic in a matter of hours. Forensic specialists would later describe the scene as both intimate and brutal. The violence suggested proximity, anger, and a disturbing understanding of the victim's routines and vulnerabilities. While the public focused on the shocking visuals and celebrity angle, the human side of the story began to emerge. Romy, now a witness and grieving daughter, faced the unimaginable task of recounting her discovery, describing her parents' lives, and reconciling the idea that someone within her own family could have perpetrated such an act. Friends and neighbors, stunned and confused, tried to make sense of what they had always assumed to be a secure, loving household. And Nick Reiner, the son living in the guest house, became the central figure in this unfolding drama, his presence and actions scrutinized in minute detail by authorities, the media, and the public. The Night of Horror is not only about what occurred physically within the estate, it is also about timing, opportunity, and the psychological impact on all involved. For investigators, reconstructing each moment is crucial. The last time Rob and Michelle were seen alive, the movements of each family member, and the eventual discovery by Romy. Each of these elements contributes to understanding motive, opportunity, and sequence. And while speculation abounds, only a methodical examination of facts can provide insight into a tragedy of this magnitude. The timing of the crime also magnified its impact. A quiet Sunday evening, a time typically associated with family, relaxation, and routine, became the backdrop for a violent disruption. This contrast between the ordinary and the horrific intensifies the psychological shock for both the family and the public. It underscores the vulnerability of even the most seemingly secure households and serves as a chilling reminder that violence can intrude on the most mundane moments. As the night unfolded, investigators began to piece together evidence that would ultimately lead them to a suspect. Nick Reiner, already living on the property, was quickly identified due to proximity, opportunity, and witness testimony. His arrest that night marked a turning point in the story. What had been a mystery now had a focal point. A person whose intimate connection to the victims made the events all the more shocking. The fact that the suspect was not a stranger but a member of the immediate family introduced layers of betrayal, psychological complexity, and emotional trauma that would dominate media coverage and public discourse for weeks to come. But while the arrest brought a sense of action, it also raised more questions. Why did it happen? Was it premeditated or impulsive? Were there warning signs that went unnoticed? Romy's warning to authorities about a dangerous family member added a chilling dimension. She had sensed something amiss, yet the tragedy still occurred. It's a stark reminder that intuition, family knowledge, and subtle warnings are not always enough to prevent catastrophe. And then there is the autopsy. While the details of the crime scene provided immediate insight into the brutality, the medical examination revealed even more alarming information. Reports suggested that the findings went beyond the physical cause of death, exposing circumstances that hinted at motives, mental states, and the chilling reality of what had occurred. These revelations would later deepen the shock, raise questions about intent, and set the stage for the legal proceedings that would dominate headlines. The Night of Horror is, in many ways, the fulcrum of the Reiner family tragedy. It is the moment where ordinary life intersected with extraordinary violence, where familial bonds were shattered, and where the public began to confront the reality that even those closest to us can sometimes be the source of our deepest fears. It is a story of timing, opportunity, betrayal, and consequence. A story that demands careful examination, not only of the physical events, but of the human behaviors, relationships, and decisions that led to them. Romy Reiner was the first to encounter the horror. At just 27 years old, she had lived most of her life in the shadow of her famous father, Rob, and under the protective care of her mother, Michelle. Growing up in the Reiner household meant being part of a family admired by millions. Yet her daily life was a mixture of privilege, expectations, and the subtle pressures that come with celebrity. On that Sunday evening, none of that mattered. What mattered was the nightmare she was about to walk into, one that would forever alter her life. Imagine the scene, walking up the familiar pathways of the Brentwood estate, the guest house in sight, the main house glowing warmly under the California sunset. Nothing seemed unusual, but as Romy entered the home, the air was thick with something unidentifiable, an immediate, visceral sense that something was wrong. Her instincts, honed over years of observing family dynamics, screamed that this was no ordinary moment. And then she saw them, her parents, Rob and Michelle, lying in the rooms that had always been safe, always welcoming. The shock is difficult to quantify. Imagine the disbelief of seeing the people you love most, the people who gave you life and love, brutally taken from you. Romy reportedly froze at first, the mind struggling to process the scene before her eyes. Horror, grief, and a surge of protective instinct collided in a matter of seconds. And yet, even in that immediate chaos, her presence of mind allowed her to reach for a phone, call the authorities, and begin recounting everything she knew. But what truly made Romy's revelation chilling was what she told the police next. She did not describe a stranger or an intruder. She described a family member, someone she had long considered dangerous. She warned that this person had the capacity for violence, that he had unsettled her before, and that he should be considered a suspect. In those words lies a chilling foresight, an awareness of danger that, tragically, went unheeded until it was too late. Police accounts later confirmed Romy's statements. Her instincts and her courage in reporting what she knew were critical in guiding the initial investigation. Detectives immediately considered her information, focusing on the people with access to the estate, knowledge of routines, and the ability to navigate the home undetected. In hindsight, Romy's warning was a thread that, if pulled, could unravel the tragic narrative sooner, but at the time, it was just one piece of a horrifying puzzle. Romy's perspective is central to understanding this tragedy, not only because she discovered the crime, but because she had been attuned to the underlying tensions in the family. Growing up in the Reiner household, she had witnessed behaviors, patterns, and interactions that might have seemed minor to outsiders, but were significant to her. Over the years, she had observed mood swings, disagreements, and subtle conflicts. Things that built up beneath the surface, largely invisible to anyone outside the family. Her description of a dangerous family member reflects an intimate knowledge of these dynamics and a deep sense of concern for her parents' safety. The emotional weight on Romy cannot be overstated. She was not only processing grief, but also confronting the reality that someone she loved and grew up with could have committed an unthinkable act. The intersection of familial loyalty and the need for truth is one of the most painful aspects of domestic tragedies, and Romy's role placed her squarely in that impossible position. She had to reconcile love with fear, memory with horror, and intuition with reality, all while cooperating with law enforcement. Friends and extended family would later describe Romy as calm and composed in the face of unimaginable stress. Yet beneath that composure, the psychological impact was profound. The knowledge that the suspect was a close family member, coupled with the brutal nature of the crime, created layers of trauma that would not fade easily. For Romy, there was also the added responsibility of being the conduit between the private horror of the estate and the public reality of the investigation. Every statement she made, every recollection she shared, would shape how authorities understood the crime and how the public perceived the family. Her revelation also raised immediate questions for investigators. If Romy had sensed danger, what had been the warning signs? Were there incidents or behaviors that, in retrospect, pointed to a growing threat? And why had no one anticipated that the tension within the household could escalate into lethal violence? These questions highlighted the often overlooked complexities of family dynamics, especially in households with a mix of fame, wealth, and private pressures. Psychologists and experts who later analyzed the case emphasized that Romy's awareness of potential danger is not unusual in families where conflict has simmered for years. Children often notice patterns of behavior, and early warning signs of potential violence before adults do, or before anyone else recognizes the risk. In this case, Romy's intuition, honed by both familial experience and personal observation, provided the first clue that the tragedy might have been preventable, or at least anticipated. But what made her revelation even more dramatic was the specificity. She did not speak in vague terms. She identified characteristics, behaviors, and even potential motives that could guide the police investigation. This level of detail was rare, particularly in situations where emotional shock could impair judgment. Yet Romy delivered it, bridging the gap between grief and action, instinct and investigation. Her testimony became a linchpin in the case, framing the narrative around familial suspicion rather than random crime. The public response to Romy's revelation was immediate and intense. Social media platforms, news outlets, and online forums exploded with speculation. Could it really be a family member? How could someone so close commit such an act? Romy, often portrayed as private and reserved, suddenly became the face of both the discovery and the moral center of the story. A person who had the courage to confront horrific reality and act responsibly in a moment of crisis. But even as the world reacted, Romy faced the intimate horror of her daily reality. She had to return to the estate, to the place where her parents had been taken from her, and cooperate with investigators, all while grappling with shock, grief, and betrayal. Each step through the estate was a confrontation with both memory and evidence, with the life she had known and the nightmare that had replaced it. Her account also prompted law enforcement to consider psychological dynamics in the household. Nick Reiner, the son in the guest house, became the focus. Investigators sought to understand his relationships with his parents, his behaviors leading up to the event, and any previous incidents that could shed light on the night's violence. Romy's observations became a roadmap, providing context and urgency to the investigation. As the chapter unfolds, it becomes clear that Romy's revelation is not just a factual report. It is a pivotal moment in the story. Her insight, courage, and emotional clarity transformed a chaotic scene into an actionable investigation. Without her, the timeline might have remained murky, the suspect unidentified for longer, and the emotional toll on the family even more pronounced. And yet, even with Romy's warning and the swift response by law enforcement, the tragedy had already occurred. The deaths of Rob and Michelle Reiner were irreversible. The estate, once a place of family warmth and security, now stood as a symbol of vulnerability, betrayal, and the consequences of unchecked tensions. Nick Reiner, 32, was the son who lived in the guest house of the Brentwood estate, a structure that offered him both independence and constant proximity to his parents. To outsiders, Nick may have seemed like a typical adult child of a famous family, living comfortably, pursuing his own interests, and maintaining a level of detachment from the public eye. But as the tragic events of that Sunday night revealed, there was far more beneath the surface. Nick was not just another son living under a wealthy roof. He was the central figure in a devastating drama that would shock Hollywood and the world alike. From a young age, Nick grew up in the shadow of his father's fame. Rob Reiner, a Hollywood icon, had spent decades building a career filled with accolades, public recognition, and professional respect. For children of celebrities, living in that shadow can be both inspiring and suffocating. On one hand, there is privilege, access, and opportunity. On the other, there is pressure to live up to the expectations, the constant gaze of public attention, and the weight of a legacy that feels impossible to match. For Nick, this duality shaped his personality and his place within the family dynamic. Friends and acquaintances described Nick as intelligent and creative, yet private and sometimes unpredictable. He maintained a degree of independence by living in the guest house, separating himself from the daily routines of the main household. That independence, however, came with a cost. Physical separation did not necessarily equate to emotional distance. The proximity allowed him access, familiarity, and, as investigators would later note, the opportunity to act in ways that no outsider could. Every door, hallway, and pathway on the estate was known to him. Every routine, every schedule, every familial interaction was mapped in his mind. That knowledge, tragically, would make him a dangerous presence on the night of the crime. Nick's relationship with his parents has been described as complex. While there was love and connection, there were also tensions, subtle, sometimes unspoken, yet significant in hindsight. Conflicts over independence, expectations, and lifestyle choices reportedly existed, though details remain largely private. In families of wealth and prominence, these pressures are amplified. Decisions carry financial, emotional, and social weight that can strain even the closest bonds. For Nick, navigating these pressures may have contributed to internal conflicts, feelings of frustration, or resentment, factors that investigators would later scrutinize closely. His sister, Romy, had noticed behaviors that concerned her. She had described him as dangerous, a term that implies more than youthful rebellion or ordinary disagreements. It suggests a perception of unpredictability, of capacity for harm, and perhaps of simmering anger or psychological volatility. What prompted Romy to use that term? Was it a series of small incidents, escalating behaviors, or subtle threats that only a family member could perceive? While outsiders might dismiss these concerns as typical sibling tension, in retrospect, they were harbingers of a catastrophic event. Nick's lifestyle prior to the tragedy appeared relatively quiet. Reports suggest he maintained a low public profile, avoided media attention, and focused on personal projects or interests. But this calm exterior may have masked inner turmoil. Family insiders hinted at disagreements with his parents, feelings of isolation, and a desire for independence that sometimes manifested as friction. In cases like this, external appearances can be misleading. Someone may seem stable, composed, or ordinary, while internally grappling with emotional or psychological struggles that escalate under pressure. The night of the incident, Nick's proximity and familiarity with the estate became critical. Living in the guest house, he had freedom of movement and knowledge of the property's layout, which would later become a focus for investigators. Security footage, access points, and patterns of movement all pointed to the fact that someone intimately familiar with the estate could execute the crime and evade immediate detection. That someone, tragically, was Nick. Beyond physical access, investigators would consider motive, psychological state, and prior interactions. Was this an impulsive act born of anger or conflict? Was it premeditated, calculated, and fueled by long-standing grievances? Were there external pressures or influences that contributed to the decision to commit such a horrific act? Each question framed the investigation and added layers to the story that the public would follow with fascination and horror. The arrest of Nick Reiner on the night of the murders marked a turning point. 2 counts of first-degree murder were filed, formalizing the suspicion that had grown from Romy's initial revelation and the physical evidence at the scene. For many, it was almost incomprehensible. The idea that a son could commit such violence against his own parents challenges fundamental assumptions about family, loyalty, and trust. The arrest also shifted public perception from a shocking crime story to a deeply personal family tragedy. Suddenly, headlines weren't just about celebrity victims. They were about betrayal, familial conflict, and the psychological unraveling of a household once thought secure. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues of the Reiner family struggled to reconcile the image of Nick they knew with the actions he was accused of. Public fascination often blends empathy, curiosity, and judgment. Many wondered what could drive someone to commit such acts within the walls of their own home. The combination of wealth, fame, and family pressure, while alluring to outsiders, can create unique stressors and psychological strain that, when coupled with personality traits or behavioral issues, may escalate into violence. Experts would later analyze patterns common in domestic tragedies. They noted that familiarity with victims, access to private spaces, and unresolved interpersonal conflict are often critical factors in crimes within family homes. In Nick's case, these factors converged in a way that amplified both the opportunity and the severity of the crime. Investigators would focus on his behaviors, prior incidents, and psychological profile, aiming to reconstruct not just the night of the murders, but the context that led to them. Nick's story is not just about guilt or innocence. It's about understanding the human elements that precede tragedy. Every family has tensions, disagreements, and hidden dynamics. In this case, the Reiner household, despite its wealth and status, was no exception. The difference lies in how those dynamics escalated unchecked, culminating in an act of unimaginable violence. And as the investigation progressed, the details of Nick's actions, his movements through the estate, and the findings of forensic experts would begin to paint a picture that was both chilling and shocking. The autopsy, security analysis, and witness accounts would combine to provide a narrative that confirmed suspicions, raised questions, and ensured that public attention would remain riveted. The autopsy report is often the point where speculation meets science, where the unknown is transformed into evidence, and where the chilling reality of a crime becomes impossible to ignore. For Rob and Michelle Reiner, the autopsy revealed horrifying details that went far beyond the initial scene observed by investigators. What had already shocked the world now gained a layer of medical and forensic confirmation, exposing truths about the final moments of their lives and raising questions that no one could have anticipated. From the first glance, the findings confirmed what the police had suspected. Both Rob and Michelle had died from multiple stab wounds, injuries consistent with close, personal violence. But the report went further, offering insights that suggested more than just a violent outburst. The depth, angle, and location of the wounds indicated precision, proximity, and intent. Each wound told a story, and forensic pathologists were able to piece together a sequence that painted a picture of not only the act itself, but the psychological state of the perpetrator. In addition to the physical injuries, the autopsy revealed alarming patterns of force and timing. Rob's wounds suggested defensive movements, implying he may have attempted to shield himself from an attack he did not anticipate or fully understand until the last moments. Michelle's injuries, on the other hand, suggested a confrontation where surprise, proximity, and trust intersected tragically. These medical details provided a narrative that was impossible to ignore. The violence was intimate, deliberate, and executed by someone who knew their movements and behaviors. Investigators noted the significance of these findings in establishing both the timeline and the potential motive. Forensic details, such as the depth of the wounds, the presence of hesitation marks, and the location of the injuries, offered clues about the perpetrator's mental state. Were they angry, impulsive, or calculating? Each mark became a piece of the puzzle, a signal in the data that hinted at premeditation, psychological turmoil, or both. In cases involving family members as suspects, these details are especially telling. They speak to the dynamics of betrayal, trust, and intimate knowledge that outsiders cannot replicate. Toxicology reports added another layer of complexity. Though initial findings showed no indication of external substances contributing to the victim's vulnerability, the results confirmed the suddenness of the attack. There was no evidence of sedatives, alcohol, or other compounds that might have incapacitated Rob or Michelle. The autopsy suggested that the tragedy unfolded in real time, leaving no room for escape or intervention. This immediacy heightened the horror. The victims were attacked in a place they felt safest, by someone they trusted, with no warning and no external interference. The medical examiner also highlighted the psychological implications inherent in the nature of the injuries. When violence occurs within a family, the proximity and method often reflect deeper dynamics: anger, frustration, perceived betrayal, or a complex interplay of long-standing grievances. In this case, the combination of lethal intent and intimate knowledge suggested a disturbing familiarity with the victim's routines, habits, and physical responses. The perpetrator, investigators concluded, was someone who had lived alongside the victims, someone whose presence in the household provided both opportunity and access. Romy's initial revelation now gained scientific confirmation. Her description of a dangerous family member aligned with the forensic findings. This was not a random act, nor the result of an external intrusion. It was, tragically, an act of domestic violence executed by a person embedded within the family structure. The medical evidence, combined with Romy's testimony, allowed investigators to narrow their focus, reinforce the timeline, and anticipate patterns in the suspect's behavior that could inform arrest and prosecution. But the autopsy also revealed subtle contradictions that puzzled investigators. Some wounds appeared inconsistent with a single sequence of actions, suggesting either a struggle or a period of hesitation. There were questions about whether the attacks had escalated in intensity over moments or were executed with sudden, explosive force. Forensic teams speculated about emotional fluctuations during the act, bursts of rage, moments of control, and indications of internal conflict. These nuances, while technical, offered insight into the psychological complexity of the crime and the potential mindset of the suspect. Media outlets quickly seized upon the autopsy findings, highlighting the brutality and intimate nature of the attack. Headlines emphasized the shocking details, from the number of stab wounds to the targeted nature of the injuries. Social media erupted with both speculation and sympathy, as viewers attempted to reconcile the public image of the Reiners with the horrors revealed in the report. The combination of celebrity status and domestic violence created a narrative that captivated audiences and intensified scrutiny on the suspect, Nick Reiner. Experts in criminal psychology weighed in, noting that familial homicides are often marked by underlying tension, unresolved conflict, and psychological instability. In cases where adult children commit violence against parents, the contributing factors can range from financial disputes to deep-seated resentment, mental health struggles, or long-standing familial conflicts. In Nick's case, the autopsy provided crucial evidence that the crime was not spontaneous in its intent, even if certain aspects of the act were impulsive. The intimate nature of the wounds suggested knowledge, opportunity, and a disturbing precision. The autopsy also influenced the legal proceedings. Prosecutors cited the medical evidence to substantiate charges of first-degree murder, emphasizing that the act required forethought, understanding, and deliberate action. Defense teams, in turn, would have to grapple with the overwhelming physical evidence that aligned with both eyewitness testimony and the suspect's proximity to the scene. The autopsy, therefore, became a linchpin in the case, bridging the gap between emotional narrative, physical evidence, and legal strategy. Beyond its investigative and legal significance, the autopsy reinforced the emotional weight of the tragedy. For Romy, every detail confirmed the reality she had already confronted: the sudden, brutal loss of her parents at the hands of someone within her own family. For friends, colleagues, and the broader public, the report transformed speculation into tangible evidence, creating a narrative that was as horrifying as it was compelling. Each fact, each forensic observation, underscored the depth of betrayal and the intimacy of the crime. And yet, even with these revelations, questions remained unanswered. Why did it happen? Was there a precipitating event that triggered the attack, or was it the culmination of long-standing tension? Were there warning signs that, if interpreted differently, could have prevented the tragedy? These questions would guide further investigation, shaping interviews, psychological assessments, and the narrative that the media and the public would follow closely. The autopsy also highlighted one chilling fact: the act was deliberate and methodical enough to suggest awareness of consequences. Whoever committed the crime understood both the physical and emotional impact of their actions, knew the routines of the victims, and executed the act with precision. This awareness added another layer of horror, emphasizing that the tragedy was not merely the result of emotional impulse, but of intimate knowledge and perhaps deeper motives that had yet to be fully revealed. But what came next? The emerging psychological profile, the interrogation of Nick Reiner, and the shocking motives hinted at by investigators would push the story into even darker, more complex territory. The autopsy was only the beginning. What it revealed about the victims' deaths would soon be connected to behaviors, relationships, and hidden tensions that no one outside the family had fully understood. The arrest of Nick Reiner was the moment when speculation turned into reality, when rumors and suspicion converged into a concrete legal action, and when the world's gaze fell squarely on a family torn apart from within. By the time law enforcement moved in, the atmosphere at the Brentwood estate had shifted from shock and disbelief to intense scrutiny, grief, and a sense of impending revelation. What had started as a tragic discovery now demanded immediate accountability, and all evidence pointed to one person. Nick, 32, had lived in the guest house on the estate for years, a structure that provided him both independence and close proximity to his parents. That proximity, combined with Romy's warning and the physical evidence at the scene, made him the primary suspect almost immediately. Detectives had spent hours analyzing the estate, reconstructing the night of the murders, and assessing the movements of everyone with access to the property. Every doorway, hallway, and window was examined. Every footprint, fingerprint, and digital trace cataloged. The picture that emerged was clear and chilling. Nick had both the opportunity and the intimate knowledge necessary to commit the crime. The actual moment of arrest was tense and procedural, yet dramatic in its implications. Officers approached the guest house carefully, aware that the suspect was not a stranger but a family member. Inside, Nick was reportedly calm, almost detached, a demeanor that investigators would later note as significant when piecing together the psychological profile of the case. Calmness in such circumstances is not always what it seems. It can signal shock, denial, or calculated restraint, each possibility offering a window into motive and state of mind. Authorities read Nick his rights and formally took him into custody for 2 counts of first-degree murder. The charges alone were staggering. The implication that a son had allegedly taken the lives of both his parents is a scenario almost inconceivable in the public imagination. As the handcuffs clicked and the law enforcement vehicles pulled away, the Brentwood estate seemed to hold its breath, silent witness to a family tragedy that was as intimate as it was public. Neighbors and witnesses were stunned. Many had observed Nick over the years, quiet, somewhat reclusive, unassuming in many ways, but the image of him as a calm, private individual clashed violently with the accusations. Questions swirled. What had driven him to commit such an act? Was it a sudden eruption of anger, a long-standing resentment, or something more calculated?